I'm Jessica Garcia, 26, female. I live in a small, cozy apartment that smells like old books and fresh coffee, a perfect retreat from the controlled chaos of being a high school English teacher. For most of the year, my life is my own, filled with grading papers, discussing literary themes with teenagers, and enjoying the quiet company of my cat Poe. But once a year, every year, my life shrinks to fit inside my parents' immaculate, suffocatingly perfect house for Christmas. This is the story of the last Christmas I ever spent there, the Christmas where a single scream saved my life and exposed a poison that had been seeping into my family for decades. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The air in my parents' home was always different at Christmas. Thicker, heavier, and laced with the cloying scent of pine-scented candles and unspoken rules. My father, Michael, a recently retired pharmacist, moved with a quiet precision, ensuring every ornament on the tree was perfectly spaced. My mother, Linda, a former librarian, curated the festive atmosphere like she was curating a rare book collection, beautiful to look at, but fragile and not to be touched. This year was no different. The charade of the happy, flawless Garcia family was in full swing, and its lead actress, as always, was my older sister, Megan. At 30, Megan was the family's dazzling success story. As a marketing director for a major firm, she was sharp, polished, and possessed a smile that could sell snow in a blizzard. She arrived in a car that cost more than my annual salary, wearing a cashmere sweater that was the color of cream, and handed out gifts wrapped with the kind of geometric precision I could never master. "Jessie, you look comfortable," she said, her eyes sweeping over my simple knitted sweater and jeans. It was her signature move, a compliment wrapped around an insult. I just smiled, happy to be home, Meg. The tension between us was a living thing, an invisible guest at every family gathering. To my parents, Megan was the sun, and I was a planet in her orbit, expected to be grateful for her warmth. They never saw the scorch marks she left on me. They only saw her achievements, her confidence, her perfect life. My life, dedicated to teaching, to literature, to shaping young minds, was seen as a quaint, noble, but ultimately lesser, pursuit. Dinner was the main event, the centerpiece of the charade. My mom had cooked for 2 days, but this year Megan had insisted on contributing her famous sausage and herb stuffing. "I found a new recipe online," she announced, placing the heavy ceramic dish on the table. "It has a secret ingredient that makes it absolutely divine." My mom watched Megan with a tight, unreadable expression. A flicker of something, anxiety, maybe, crossed her face before being smoothed away into her usual placid mask. My dad, meanwhile, was oblivious, beaming with pride at his 2 daughters together. One critical fact about me, a fact known to everyone in that room since I was a toddler, is that I have a severe nut allergy. Not just peanuts, but a whole range of tree nuts. It was the reason my mom's kitchen was a nut-free zone and why I carried an EpiPen in my purse at all times. It was a simple rule, the one line that could never be crossed. As we all sat down, the scent of roasted turkey, gravy, and Megan's special stuffing filled the room. The conversation was painfully predictable. Megan's recent promotion, my father's golf game, the weather. I played my part, asking Megan about her big projects and nodding along, feeling the familiar exhaustion of pretending. "You have to try the stuffing, Jessie," Megan urged, her smile a little too bright. "I made sure it was totally safe for you." I hesitated. A small, cold knot of unease tightened in my stomach, but to refuse would be to cause a scene, to crack the perfect veneer of the evening. It would make me the difficult one, the ungrateful sister. So I picked up my fork and scooped a small amount onto my plate next to the turkey and mashed potatoes. I looked around the table. My dad was already eating his. My mom was just staring at her plate, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I lifted the fork to my mouth. The smell was rich and savory. I could see the finely chopped herbs, the browned sausage. It looked normal. It looked safe. It looked like just another part of our annual Christmas lie. The fork was an inch from my lips. The happy holiday chatter in the room faded into a dull hum in my ears as I focused on the simple act of taking a bite. It was a move I had made thousands of times in my life, an act of trust. Trust in my family to protect me, to remember the one thing that could genuinely harm me. Don't do it. The shriek tore through the placid atmosphere of the dining room. It was my mother. Her voice, usually so measured and calm, was raw with terror. My hand froze midair. I looked up, bewildered. Her face was as white as the tablecloth, her eyes wide with a panic I had never seen before. They were fixed on my fork, on the small portion of stuffing poised to enter my mouth. Before I could ask what was wrong, her eyes rolled back in her head. She made a soft gasping sound, and her body went limp. She slumped sideways in her chair, a dead weight, collapsing onto the floor with a sickeningly soft thud. Chaos erupted. My father, Michael, shot up from his seat, his pharmacist instincts kicking in instantly. Linda, he yelled, rushing to her side. He dropped to his knees, checking her pulse, tilting her head back to clear her airway. The festive dinner was forgotten, replaced by the stark, terrifying reality of my mother unconscious on the floor. I was paralyzed for a second, my mind struggling to process the two events, the scream and the collapse. My fork was still in my hand, the stuffing still on it. I slowly lowered it, placing it back on my plate as if it were a venomous insect. Megan was the last to react. "Mom, what the heck?" she said, her voice laced with annoyance rather than concern. She stood up, peering over the table. Is she okay? What just happened? Her expression wasn't one of fear for our mother, but of irritation, as if Mom had just committed a massive social foul, ruining her perfectly orchestrated dinner. "Call 911. My dad barked, not looking up from where he was cradling my mom's head. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers feeling clumsy and disconnected from my brain. I dialed the numbers, my voice trembling as I explained the situation to the operator. While I was on the phone, my dad managed to get my mom to stir. Her eyelids fluttered open and she groaned softly. What happened?" She mumbled, looking around in a daze. "You fainted, honey," my dad said, his voice thick with relief. He helped her sit up, propping her against the leg of the dining table. "Just breathe. The paramedics are on their way." Megan let out an exaggerated sigh. "Oh, thank God. She probably just stood up too fast or something." She looked at me, then at the dish of stuffing. "Well, I guess dinner is ruined." Her callousness was staggering. Our mother had just collapsed, and all she could think about was her stupid side dish. But it was more than that. A cold, dreadful thought began to form in the back of my mind. My mom hadn't just fainted. She had screamed at me. She had screamed to stop me from eating. The paramedics arrived a few minutes later, a whirlwind of professional calm. They checked my mother's vitals, asked her questions. Her blood pressure was a little low, but she was coherent now, insisting she was fine. "I just got overwhelmed," she said, her voice weak. "All the excitement of the holiday. I'm so sorry to have caused such a fuss." She refused to go to the hospital, promising my dad she would see her doctor the next day. As the paramedics left and a fragile quiet settled over the house, my mom avoided my eyes. My dad fussed over her, getting her a glass of water and helping her to the couch in the living room. Megan started clearing the table with loud, clattering movements, her frustration obvious. "I spent 2 days brining that turkey," she muttered under her breath. I remained at the table, staring at my plate. At the stuffing, my mom hadn't screamed because she felt faint. She had screamed to warn me. There was no other explanation. The two events were linked. I scraped the stuffing off my plate and into a napkin, my movements small and discreet. I folded it carefully and slipped it into my coat pocket. I didn't know what I was going to do with it, but I knew I couldn't leave it here. It felt like evidence of a crime I couldn't yet name, a betrayal so profound that my brain refused to fully accept it. My mother had fainted to stop me from finding out a truth she couldn't bring herself to speak, and that truth had something to do with my sister. The days after Christmas were thick with a silence that was louder than any argument. My mother claimed she was feeling much better, attributing her fainting spell to stress and low blood sugar. My father watched her like a hawk, his face etched with worry. Megan had returned to her own life in the city, sending a single text that said, "Hope Mom's okay." That was so dramatic. But I couldn't let it go. My mother's scream echoed in my mind. Her terror had been real. I kept the small, napkin-wrapped sample of stuffing in a plastic bag in my fridge, a ticking time bomb of unanswered questions. What was in it, and why would my mother faint rather than just say, "Don't eat that"? The only logical answer was that telling the truth was, for her, somehow more catastrophic than the lie. It meant she was protecting someone. And there was only one person in that room who needed protecting from the consequences of trying to hurt me: Megan. The thought was monstrous, that my own sister, my blood, would deliberately poison me on Christmas Day. It seemed impossible, and yet it was the only theory that fit. Megan's jealousy had always been a sharp, cutting thing, but I never thought it could manifest as something so physically dangerous. I needed proof. A vague suspicion wasn't enough. I couldn't confront anyone without facts. My mind went back to my allergy. I'd had the same diagnosis since I was 5, a general, severe allergy to tree nuts. But what if it was more specific? What if Megan, with her marketing director's talent for research, had found a loophole? The following week, I made an appointment with a new allergist in a different city, an hour's drive away. I didn't tell my parents. I needed a completely fresh perspective. I explained my history and requested the most comprehensive food sensitivity panel they could run. I want to know everything. I told the doctor every specific protein, every potential cross-reaction, everything. 2 agonizing weeks later, the results came in. I sat in the doctor's office, my heart pounding against my ribs as she pulled up my file on her computer screen. "Well, Jessica," she said, turning to face me. "Your original diagnosis was correct, but it wasn't complete. You do have a general allergy to several common tree nuts, like walnuts and pecans. However, the primary driver of your allergy, the one that would cause a full-blown anaphylactic reaction, is much more specific and far more potent." She pointed to a line on the screen. "You have an extreme allergy to the 2-albumin protein found specifically in Brazil nuts. It's one of the most severe food allergies we know of. For you, ingesting even a trace amount, especially if it's aerosolized in flour form, could be fatal within minutes." Brazil nuts. The words hit me like a physical blow. Of all the nuts in the world, it was one of the least common in baking. You would have to go out of your way to use them, especially in a stuffing recipe that traditionally called for pecans or walnuts. You would have to seek them out. My blood ran cold, the secret ingredient. Megan's smug smile as she placed the dish on the table. It all clicked into place with horrifying clarity. She hadn't just contaminated the food with a common allergen. She had researched my specific vulnerability and targeted it with surgical precision. She could have easily ground Brazil nuts into a fine flour, almost undetectable in a savory, crumbly stuffing. If anyone had asked, she could have claimed ignorance. Oh, I knew she was allergic to nuts, but I had no idea about Brazil nuts specifically. It was just a fancy recipe I found. It was the perfect crime, disguised as a tragic accident. My mother must have found out. She must have seen the packaging in the trash, or caught Megan in the act, and in that split second at the dinner table, faced with an impossible choice, expose her golden child as a monster or watch her other child die. Her mind and body simply broke. The scream was instinct. The feint was self-preservation, a way to stop the world, to stop the truth from coming out. I walked out of that doctor's office feeling like a different person. The world looked sharp and dangerous. I wasn't just the less favored daughter anymore. I was a survivor. The sample of stuffing in my fridge was no longer just a suspicion. It was the weapon, and I now knew exactly what kind of poison it held. Armed with the devastating knowledge from the allergy test, my entire past began to reorganize itself in my mind. It was like finding the key to a coded message I'd been reading my whole life. Memories I had dismissed as thoughtlessness or petty sibling rivalry now looked sinister, like dark little breadcrumbs leading to the horror of that Christmas dinner. I remembered my 10th birthday party, a slumber party in the basement. Megan, then a teenager, had been put in charge of the snacks. One of my friends had a severe reaction that night. Her face swelled up, and she had trouble breathing. An ambulance was called. My parents had blamed it on some candy the friend brought herself. But I remembered Megan serving a special secret recipe of popcorn. Had that been a trial run, a test to see what would happen? I remembered a high school graduation party where Megan accidentally ordered a celebration cake from a bakery known for its almond paste frosting, even though my mom had given her a list of approved nut-free bakeries. I'd refused to eat it, and Megan had pouted, accusing me of being overly dramatic and ungrateful. "I worked so hard to get this for you, Jessie. A little almond won't kill you." At the time, I thought she was just being ignorant. Now, her words sounded like a taunt. This new, horrifying lens colored everything. Her constant backhanded compliments about my simple life, her subtle sabotage of my past relationships by accidentally letting slip embarrassing stories, her way of framing my achievements as small and insignificant next to hers. These weren't just acts of jealousy. They were a systematic campaign of psychological warfare, designed to keep me small, to keep me in my place. The stuffing was just the logical, terrifying conclusion to a lifetime of little cruelties. I knew I couldn't carry this alone. I needed to talk to one of my parents. My mother was compromised. She had chosen to protect Megan over telling me the truth. That left my father. I drove to my parents' house on a Saturday morning. I found my dad in his workshop in the garage, meticulously organizing screws and bolts. It was the place he went to think. "Dad," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "We need to talk about Christmas." He stopped what he was doing and turned to me, his face weary. "Jessica, your mother is convinced it was just a dizzy spell." "It wasn't," I said, pulling the lab report from the allergist out of my purse. "I got a new allergy test done." I laid it on his workbench and explained everything, the specific, severe allergy to Brazil nuts, the concept of it being ground into an undetectable flour. As a pharmacist, he understood the clinical details immediately. He read the report, his brow furrowed. I watched the dawning horror in his eyes as he connected the medical facts to the events of that day. "Her secret ingredient," he whispered, looking up at me. The color drained from his face. Oh God, Linda saw her. She must have seen her. He sank onto a nearby stool, looking older than I'd ever seen him. He told me that my mother hadn't been herself since Christmas. She was quiet, jumpy, and spent hours just staring out the window. When he tried to talk about it, she would just start crying and say she wanted to forget it ever happened. "We enabled this," my dad said, his voice cracking. "We always saw Megan's ambition, her competitive spirit. We called it that. We never called it cruelty. We never stepped in when she was unkind to you. We just told you to be the bigger person." Tears streamed down his face. "I am so sorry, Jessica. I am so sorry." It was the first time my father had ever truly seen the dynamic between me and my sister for what it was. His validation was a painful, heartbreaking relief. "What was in the trash that night?" I asked quietly. He looked at me, his eyes filled with shame. "I took it out after the paramedics left. I saw it then. A small yellow bag tucked underneath the other garbage. Brazil nut flour. I saw it and I didn't do anything. I convinced myself it had to be a mistake, that she couldn't have known." The final piece of the puzzle locked into place. He had known, he had suspected, and he had chosen denial. But now, faced with the cold, hard medical proof, he could no longer hide. The charade was over, at least for him. The question was, what were we going to do about it? For a few days, my father and I existed in a state of suspended shock. The truth was a toxic cloud in my parents' house, and even over the phone, I could feel its suffocating weight. He and my mother were barely speaking. He couldn't look at her without seeing her complicity, and she couldn't look at him without being reminded of the secret she was so desperate to keep buried. The legal route was tempting. I imagined police officers and courtrooms. But I knew it would be a nightmare. It would be my word against Megan's. The evidence was circumstantial, a lab test, a memory of a trash bag, a mother who would likely lie on the stand to protect her favorite child. It would tear what was left of our family to shreds in a public spectacle, and there was no guarantee of justice. Megan, with her corporate lawyer friends and her talent for manipulation, would likely walk away, painting me as a hysterical, vindictive sister. No, the justice I needed had to be personal. It had to be intimate. Megan had tried to destroy me at the family dinner table, surrounded by the trappings of love and tradition. That, I decided, was the only appropriate venue for her reckoning. I called my parents and Megan. My voice was calm, almost cheerful. "Hi, everyone," I said in a group call. "I know Christmas was a total disaster, and there's been a lot of weirdness since. I feel like we all need some closure. I want to host a belated Christmas dinner at my apartment next Saturday. Over, my treat. Let's just clear the air and start the year fresh." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. "Oh, Jessie, that's a wonderful idea," my mother said, her voice unnaturally bright. It was the sound of pure, desperate relief. She thought I was offering her an escape, a chance to paste the charade back together. "Yeah, sure, I guess I can make it," Megan said, sounding suspicious but intrigued. The idea of me hosting, of me being the magnanimous one, probably appealed to her sense of irony. My father simply said, "We'll be there, Jessica." I could hear the grim resolve in his voice. He knew this wasn't about forgiveness. I spent the next week preparing. It wasn't just a meal, it was a stage. I bought a new tablecloth. I used the good silver I inherited from my grandmother. I planned a menu of all my favorite childhood dishes, the ones my mom used to make for me before Megan's palate became the household priority. Everything was guaranteed, demonstrably nut-free. I even left the packaging for the flour, the sugar, the spices out on the kitchen counter, a silent testament to my care. As I cooked, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. For my entire life, I had been reacting to Megan, to my family's dynamics. I was always on the defensive, always trying to manage the fallout from her latest power play. Now, for the first time, I was in control. I was setting the terms. I was the one with the secret ingredient. In mine was the truth. On Saturday evening, my small apartment felt warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the icy dread in my stomach. I had set the table for 4. When the doorbell rang, I took a deep breath, smoothed down my dress, and opened the door to welcome my family into the final act. They arrived looking like actors who had forgotten their lines. My mother clutched a bottle of wine, her smile stretched painfully thin. My father's face was a stoic mask, but his eyes were filled with a deep sadness. Megan swept in, feigning a breezy confidence that didn't quite reach her eyes. She glanced around my apartment, a faint, dismissive smirk on her lips. "It's cute, Jessie, very you." Dinner was one of the most tense hours of my life. I served the roast chicken, the garlic mashed potatoes, the green beans. The food was delicious, but we all ate mechanically, the silence broken only by the clinking of cutlery. My mother tried to fill the void with meaningless chatter about the weather, but her words just evaporated into the heavy air. Megan watched me, a calculating look in her eyes, trying to figure out my angle. She thought this was a game, and she was waiting for my move. Finally, after I cleared the main course plates, I brought out a simple chocolate cake for dessert. I set it in the middle of the table, but I didn't cut it. Instead, I remained standing. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice clear and even. All 3 of them looked up at me. I said I wanted to clear the air, and I meant it. I think it's time we stopped pretending. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Megan's eyes narrowed. "I've been doing a lot of thinking about family," I continued, my gaze sweeping over each of them, about trust and about secrets. "I've also been thinking about my health, so I went to a new allergist." I walked over to the sideboard and picked up a file folder. I slid the lab report onto the table. "It turns out I have a uniquely severe, potentially fatal allergy to one specific thing. Brazil nuts. Funny, isn't it? How specific life can be, how specific a weapon can be." Megan scoffed, but a flicker of panic crossed her face. "What are you talking about? This is insane. Is it?" I turned to my father. "Dad, as a pharmacist, could you explain what would happen if someone with my specific allergy ingested Brazil nut flour, say, mixed into a stuffing?" My father looked at Megan, his expression hard as stone. "Anaphylaxis," he said, his voice low and guttural. Her throat would swell shut in minutes. Without an immediate epinephrine injection, she would suffocate, she would die. I let the words hang in the air. My mother was now openly weeping, silent tears streaming down her face. I looked directly at my sister. "So, Megan, I have a question for you. Why did you buy Brazil nut flour on December 22nd? And why did you grind it up and put it in the stuffing you so generously brought to Christmas dinner? What was your secret ingredient?" "I didn't, that's a lie." She shrieked, her composure finally shattering. "You're crazy, you've always been jealous of me, and now you're making up this insane story to ruin my life, am I?" I said calmly. "Mom, why don't you tell us what you saw in the kitchen on Christmas Eve? Why did you scream, Mom? Why did you really faint?" My mother let out a strangled sob. She looked from me to Megan, her face a mess of guilt and anguish. For a moment I thought she would retreat into her silence again. But then she looked at me, truly looked at me, and saw not the convenient, easy, to-manage daughter, but a child who had almost been murdered. I saw the bag. She choked out, her voice barely a whisper, in the trash. I saw it after she finished making the stuffing. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to believe it. Her gaze shifted to Megan. "I saw you, Megan," and at the table. When I saw her lift that fork, I couldn't. The confession sucked all the air out of the room. It was done. The truth was finally out, lying on the table next to the uncut cake. Megan stared at our mother, her face contorted with pure hatred. "You stupid, weak old woman," she hissed, and then she turned on me, her eyes blazing with a lifetime of resentment. You with your sad little life, your books, and your pathetic students, you think you're so morally superior. I have worked for everything I have, while you just float by, getting praise for being nice. I wanted to teach you a lesson. I wanted to scare you. I was sick of you." She had admitted it. In her rage, she had given me the one thing I wasn't sure I'd ever get, a full confession. My father stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Get out." he said to Megan, his voice shaking with a fury I had never heard from him before. "Get out of your sister's home, and do not come back." Megan grabbed her purse, shot me one last look of venomous hatred, and stormed out, slamming the door behind her, and then there were three. The silence that followed Megan's departure was a different kind of silence. It wasn't the tense, fragile quiet of secrets, but the vast, empty quiet of devastation. The foundation of our family had been dynamited, and we were just three survivors standing in the rubble. My mother was inconsolable, consumed by a guilt so profound she could barely speak my name. My father sat with his head in his hands for a long time before finally looking at me, his eyes full of a pain that mirrored my own. "There is nothing I can say, Jessica," he whispered, "nothing. I didn't want apologies or excuses. In that moment, I didn't want anything from them. I just wanted them to leave. I think you should both go," I said, my voice hollow. They left without another word, the sound of the door closing behind them feeling like the final page of a long, tragic book. I never saw Megan again. She was, as my father had commanded, gone. She sent a single, rambling email a week later, not of apology, but of justification, filled with twisted logic and self-pity. I deleted it without finishing. My parents, I later learned, had a monumental confrontation. My father gave my mother an ultimatum. They would go to therapy together to deal with the decades of toxic favoritism and denial, or he would leave. For the first time in her life, my mother was forced to confront the wreckage she had helped create. The months that followed were a painful, slow process of demolition and reconstruction. I cut contact with my mother completely for a while, telling my dad I needed space. I couldn't look at her without seeing her standing on that precipice and choosing, however briefly, to let me fall. I threw myself into my work and, more importantly, into therapy. I talked through the lifetime of little cruelties, finally giving them the weight and significance I had always denied them. I learned to distinguish the quiet, steady life I had built for myself from the pathetic one Megan had always painted it as. I learned that my worth was not determined by my sister's shadow. My father became my staunchest ally. He called me every week, not to push for reconciliation, but just to listen. He was doing his own work, untangling his own complicity, and in doing so, he started to become the father I always wished I'd had. That spring, for Easter, he came to my apartment alone. He brought a simple bouquet of tulips and a small, plain chocolate cake from a bakery he had personally vetted. We ate a quiet meal, the conversation easy and honest. It wasn't perfect, and the ghosts of our old family were still there, but it felt real. It felt like a beginning. My family tree was brutally pruned that Christmas. The largest, most glamorous branch, the one that had sucked all the light and nutrients for years, was hacked away. Another branch, the one I had leaned on my whole life, was fractured and needed time to heal. But new growth is only possible after the dead wood is cleared away. I lost a sister and, in many ways, the mother I thought I had. But I found a father, and more importantly, after 26 years of living in someone else's shadow, I finally, truly found myself.